Good morning. Everyone feeling good? Special welcome to our Aussie brothers and sisters. I met Jay and Byron, a couple of classic Aussie blokes this morning. Welcome, guys, and all your friends. Really cool to have you guys with us. And it's a pleasure and a privilege to be able to speak this morning. I'm going to dive straight in with a couple of parables, and then as we go through, you'll see the sort of concept that I'm bringing through, but I've titled it Together. Okay, together. So here we are, starting off in Matthew chapter 20 this morning with the parable of the workers in the vineyard. It goes like this: For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire workers for his vineyard. He agreed to pay them a denarii for the day and sent them into his vineyard. About 9 in the morning, he went out and saw others standing in the marketplace doing nothing. He told them, "You also go and work in my vineyard, and I'll pay you whatever is right." So they went. He went out again about noon, and about 3 in the afternoon he did the same thing. About 5 in the afternoon he went out and found still others standing around. He asked them, "Why have you been standing here all day long doing nothing?" "Because no one's hired us," they said. He said to them, "You go also and work in my vineyard." When evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, "Call the workers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last ones hired and going on to the first." The workers who were hired about 5 in the afternoon came, and each received a denarii. So when those came who were hired first, they expected to receive more. But each one of them also received a denarii. When they received it, they began to grumble against the landowner. "These who were hired last worked only 1 hour," they said, "and you've made them equal to us who have borne the burden of the work and the heat of the day." But he answered one of them, "I'm not being unfair to you, friend. Didn't you agree to work for a denarii? Take your pay and go. I want to give the one who was hired last the same as I gave you. Don't I have the right to do what I want with my own money? Or are you envious because I am generous? So the last will be first, and the first will be last." A parable really rich in lessons, also slightly confusing in some ways. There's a lot sort of going on and a lot to ponder after reading that. The first character we meet in that story is the landowner. Now, at that time, owning land was a way of maintaining your livelihood, even more so than today. If you had land back then, you were able to grow crops. You were able to have a place for your family to live. These crops would sustain you, obviously. People in a position that had land and could grow and could sustain themselves were in a good position, but there were many who weren't, who didn't own land. And some people had some land, they would grow some crop, they would be able to sustain themselves and their family to an extent, but then they would need more to be able to live. And these people would often go into the marketplace and they would look for work. Now, often that meant that they were at the mercy of other landowners, more wealthy landowners, or people who had more land and needed workers to come and help, in order to be hired to be able to then sustain themselves and sustain their families. So these people who were in the marketplace, they weren't just relaxing on a Saturday after a hard week's work, catching up with friends. They were there because they were in need. They didn't have enough to be able to supply the needs of themselves and their family. So this landowner who was going into the marketplace and hiring these people, he wasn't just giving them something to do or getting a hand to work with his crops. He was providing them livelihood. He was giving a life in some ways to their family. And without this landowner coming in and hiring them, they would have been without hope and really struggling. Okay, and obviously the first parallel in that parable is that's indicative of God and us, us, His people, who in our own strength are unable to justify ourselves before God, and we have a loving landowner who is full of plenty, who comes and hires us and draws us into His kingdom, and that's amazing. And if we stopped at verse 7 in that parable, I think we'd already have an amazing parable of God providing life for us who cannot provide it for ourselves. But there's more, okay? And it carries on. And when it comes time to give out the wages, the landowner obviously decides to be generous, as is his character. He's obviously a generous guy. He paid, as I've read, he paid out the wages, and he gave the same to those hired last as those hired early. And those who were hired early began to grumble. Many of us would think, well, that's kind of fair enough in some ways. We might talk about that a little bit later on, but I think the ones who were hired early, perhaps they lost perspective, the fact that they were in a state where they needed help. They needed someone to come and hire them. And they were given that. At the end of the day, they were given the same wages as someone else, but perhaps their minds had shifted and they'd forgotten the fact that, hey, without even being here, you'd be in a much worse situation. I'm going to pause on that for a second and then read another parable. This is possibly a bit more famous. It's found in Luke chapter 15, verses 11 to 32. This is the parable of the lost son. If you can read along. Jesus continued, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, 'Father, give me my share of the estate.' So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he'd spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, 'How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.' So he got up and he went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The son said to him, 'Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate, for this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' So they began to celebrate. Meanwhile, the older son was in the field. When he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked him what was going on. 'Your brother has come,' he replied, 'and your father has killed the fattened calf because he's come back safe and sound.' The older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, 'Look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. You never even gave me a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, who squandered your property with prostitutes, comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him.' 'My son,' the father said, 'you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.'" So again, an amazing parable. So many lessons to be learned there. So much to learn about God, about ourselves, about each other. We've probably heard multiple sermons on that if you've been around church for any length of time. But today I want to focus on the discussion between the father and the older brother at the end of the parable there. The argument from the older brother has similarities to the workers in the vineyard who were hired early, but perhaps even to another level in this case. The younger brother, what he's done was drastic. It's hard for us to comprehend the weight of what he did in our current culture. I'm not going to go into all the details, but effectively he was in asking for an inheritance. He's wishing his father was dead. He's wanting to go off and he's done with the family. It would have brought an awful amount of shame on the family, on the brother, the older brother, on the father, on the village. This was a big thing for him to ask that, and then beyond that, he goes and wastes it all on wild living, like he says. And then he comes back, and then the father, like this is so uncharacteristic of what a father would do in that situation, and probably even today. But he just lavishes these gifts on him and welcomes back with open arms. How would you feel as the older brother? I think if we're honest, many of us would be feeling a similar way. But the key thing that I want to focus on here, verses 31 and 32, the father speaks to the older brother saying, "My son," the father said, "you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." The Father's emphasizing that absolutely the key there is so much deeper than any of the material back and forth that went on, right? You know, the key is not that he took the money and he squandered it. The key is that he was lost and now he's found. He's back in the presence of the Father. The workers in the vineyard, they were hired early. They were given that livelihood. They would have been so grateful, but by the end of the day, perhaps they'd lost sight of that. They saw others coming in, and rather than simply being happy for them, you know, maybe they thought, oh, okay, yeah, here's some other guys, you know, surely they won't get paid the same. I mean, obviously they did. I was muddling over that. I was thinking, well, maybe the landowner could have paid them different amounts. You know, maybe, I mean, they would have all still been hired. They would have all been given hope. They would have been given some value, but, you know, he could have given a bit more to the ones who worked harder and a bit less to the others. But I think in telling this parable, perhaps Jesus was trying to emphasize that in the kingdom of God, that especially in regards to salvation, there is no room for that earning. There is no room for that sort of, you know, I've earned this, so I deserve more. You know, obviously the Bible talks about rewards for certain things, and that, but that, you know, in this case, I think Jesus is trying to emphasize, you know, in regards to salvation especially, there's no room for that. Being hired, being given purpose, being brought into relationship with God was the purpose. I think you guys who will have kids or have been kids, actually probably all of us, so we'll know when it comes to sort of dessert time, right? or sometimes we'll get, okay, kids, we're going to have dessert tonight. We'll have some ice cream. We'll get the ice cream out, get the spoon, dish the ice cream into the bowls. Everyone gets a bowl of ice cream, fair amount. And then it comes to, you know, you're holding the spoon. Can I lick the spoon? Oh, sure. Can I lick the spoon? Like, what is... You got this battle on your hands over licking the spoon, right? Has anyone been in a licking the spoon battle? Yeah. So I mean, but sometimes that we're going to lick the spoon, and that takes all the attention. All of a sudden, there's tears, there's fighting over licking the spoon. And it's like, hang on, guys, look in front of you. Everyone's got a bowl of ice cream, right? And we're arguing over a spoon. You know? I'll still do it. We still do it. But like the father said, you know, to the older brother, my son, you are always with me. Everything I have is yours. It's like, you know, you've achieved the goal. You're here. We are together. That is the goal. Okay, you've achieved that. Let's not lose focus on that. Okay? Now, this parable of the lost son was spoken by Jesus in the presence of the Pharisees. Okay, it says in Luke 15, 1-3, the tax collectors and sinners were all gathering around to hear Jesus, but the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." And then Jesus told them that parable, along with the lost sheep and the lost coin, a lot of valuable lessons in those. But the Pharisees were muttering, right? In their eyes, Jesus probably didn't deserve to be in relationship with God. They just see this guy here who's claiming to be a teacher, who's eating with, you know, sinners, welcoming them into his presence, hanging out with these people. You know, the Pharisees were doing everything they could to make sure they maintained purity so they could be in relationship with God, right? They were carrying on a lot of the traditions of their forefathers. They were studying the Bible. A lot of them probably had good hearts, were doing their best to make sure they could stay in relationship with God. And then along comes Jesus, who welcomes sinners and eats with them. And they're thinking, he doesn't deserve to be in relationship with God. What's he doing? Why is he doing this? You know? The Pharisees, in some ways, they sound similar to the older brother in the story. They're doing all the right things to deserve the relationship. They're working hard. They're in the fields. They're getting it done. You know, this guy's not. In telling this story, Jesus is showing that there's no way to justify your position in God's kingdom based on your status or how you've kept the law or whatever. You know, he's telling this and showing them, hey, you're there because the Father has called you. You're there because he initiated the relationship and he's welcomed you into his family. Okay? He wants to call others too. He wants to give all of us a purpose, and he wants us to be in his family, and he wants us to be living in his ways. But living in his ways don't justify us being in that family or give us more rights than anybody else who will be called into that family. Most of the Pharisees, they didn't recognize who Jesus was. Ultimately, they rejected him and crucified them, but many of them never got to know Jesus. Some of them did. You might remember Nicodemus. He was a Pharisee, a tax collector. What happened? Jesus met Nicodemus. They interacted. His life changed. Many of the Pharisees didn't. They just looked on. I want to look quickly at the life of Peter. Peter, a famous Bible character, did some amazing things, certainly had his ups and downs. But Peter, he was a fisherman, okay? Now, in those days, again, all the young people in those days, they would learn the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible. They would try and memorize that, Jewish boys. They would be learning. They would do their best to memorize as much as they could. And if you memorize like all the Torah, then you might go to another level. You try and memorize the whole Old Testament. And then if you do well at that, you might be called by a rabbi or a teacher, and they would call you and you would follow them and grow, and maybe perhaps one day you become a rabbi yourself. If you weren't so good at that, then you didn't manage to memorize the Torah, or you were struggling, or you clearly weren't showing signs that you could sort of carry on that path, you would go and learn your family trade, okay, like Peter did. He was a fisherman, right? So he obviously hadn't done too well, or wasn't on that journey too far, and he'd gone to be a fisherman with his father. Okay, but then this teacher comes along, Jesus, and he calls Peter. Now, Peter would be thinking, what? I haven't done all the stuff that I'm supposed to do to then be called by a rabbi or a teacher. Why are you calling me? Jesus calls him out. Peter, come follow me. What does Peter do? He follows him. He steps out and he goes and follows Jesus. This begins a relationship, right? Jesus calls Peter along with some other disciples. They get to know each other. Peter walks with Jesus. Peter becomes friends with Jesus. You can read all the stories about how Jesus and Peter related throughout life. But he answered Jesus' call and he came to know him in a deep way. Matthew chapter 16, 13 to 20. Let's read this. Verse 13. When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, who do people say the Son of Man is? Speaking about himself. Who do people say that I am? They replied, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets. But what about you, he asked. Who do you say I am? Simon Peter answered, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. Jesus replied, blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Then he ordered the disciples not to tell anyone that he was the Messiah. So Jesus asked, who do they say I am? They that aren't disciples, they that are onlookers, they that know about me but aren't in relationship with me. Who do they say that I am? And then he asked the disciples, who do you say that I am? And Peter, who's been walking with Jesus, who's in relationship with Jesus, who's gone through these highs and lows, who does he say Jesus is? He says, you're the Messiah, the Son of the living God. Jesus didn't say to Peter, I'm the Messiah, repeat after me. Jesus called Peter, an undeserving man, to come and follow his teacher, to relate with the Son of God, the living God. And as he did that, remember Jesus says, I and the Father are one. The Father reveals to Peter that he is the Messiah. He comes to know that this is the living God through relating with him, not simply by looking on. Jesus then goes on to give him the keys of the kingdom and says, on this rock I will build my church. And I think a big part of that is on that relationship that they developed. Psalm 34 verse 8 says, taste and see that the Lord is good. I think that the truth will not be fully revealed to us by just looking on and studying what is out there. It's when we come to taste, when we come into relationship with God, when we step with him, when we weather life with him, that we see that he is good and we see who he truly is. Today is the 3rd of December and we're entering into the Christmas season. Anyone excited about the Christmas season? Yeah, I see some Christmas lovers here. I'm very excited as well. But the 3rd of December, we're approaching Christmas, and Christmas is a season which embodies this topic, I think, in all its fullness. Okay? When God sent Jesus into the world, he was deciding that he wanted to establish a relationship. For humans had tried for so long to please God from a distance. But when Christmas, what we celebrate is him sending his son Jesus to be born on earth, to come and interact with us. Matthew 1:23 says this is the angel speaking to Joseph. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and they will call him Emmanuel, which means God with us. And that's what it's all about. God with us. That's what Jesus was called. He came to be with us, to establish that relationship, to call us from our marketplace life, from where we were, to be in his vineyard, working closely with him. He called us, he ran toward us like the Father. He ran toward us despite that Father, what it looked like for him. He came to us to be with us, for we were lost, and he wanted to find us again and bring us into his family. That's what he's done at Christmas. That's what he's done then dying on the cross and giving us his Holy Spirit, is to be with us and to live life in relationship with us, for us to be together. Now, we might identify with a whole variety of characters in these stories that I've read this morning. We probably have parts of many of the characters inside of us at different times. I hope you guys can remember, those who are saved, what it meant to you that first time when you came to know Jesus. I know for me, it was a knowing, like a deep knowing in my soul, like I'm home, I found this. But also being able to truly breathe. I often describe to people just being able to breathe for the first time in a spiritual way, which is very hard to describe. Being peaceful, Jesus talks about living water, having your thirst quenched. It's an amazing thing to come into relationship with Jesus in that way and have it transform who you are. But I've also had times in life when I've been battered around, been confused, felt like I was lost. There was a period of time fairly recently when I went through a time like this, and and I was so confused, and I was sort of trying to reach out to God and connect with him. What's going on here? I felt like I'd been held down by a giant wave, and I'm spinning, and I don't know what's up, and it sort of goes dark, and I'm not sure where I am, but I knew that God's there, and he can see all this. And I would pray, and I didn't know what to pray. And there was one day I was driving, and I just prayed. I was like, God, can you just find me? Like, I don't know where I am in this, I'm lost, but I know you see it all. Can you find me, God? And and then as I was, this is a while back, as I was prepping this message, again I was driving, and I was having this sort of time with God. And I just sort of felt like he sort of says to me, hey, we're here, not because of what you've done, but, throughout this whole season, I've carried you, and I'll continue to carry you. And I've found you, like I've seen all of this. I know I can see it. You're okay, like I've carried you, I've brought you here, and I'll continue to do that. And it's an amazing thing to know that you are found by God, that you are with him, that he's your Father, that the relationship is there, and that no matter what, he's not going to just let you go again. He's always going to run toward you and bring you back. So I want to encourage us all this morning with this message. God loves you so much. He's called you. He's calling you. Perhaps some of you, he's calling you for the first time. Perhaps some of you have written yourselves off. You might feel like the prodigal. You might think, I don't deserve to be here with these people in this place with God. Truth is, you don't, but neither do I. Neither does any of us. None of us deserve to be here because of ourselves, but we are here in response to our loving Father who calls us. He wants to give us life. He wants to give it in all of its fullness, and he wants to be with us. That is the end goal. So this morning, whether you feel like you're lost in that place and you need to come back to the Father, I tell you, He's taken the first step towards you already. You just need to respond. Some of us might feel like the older brother or the vineyard workers who were hired early, and we think, oh, sorry, God, like, you know, I've been here for a while and I feel like I've deserved to, but Lord, thank you that you're reminding me that your grace has got me here and will get me through. And we just open our hearts to that again this morning. So the worship team's going to come, and I'm going to wrap up, but I hope that blesses you this morning, especially, like I said, as we enter into this Christmas season. Let's remember that He came and He welcomed us into His presence by sending His Son, and the drastic length He went through to do that. This morning, I'm going to pray, and then if anybody is in that position, any of those positions, you want to respond to Jesus, obviously we're going to stand, we're going to sing, and we're going to have a time where we can do that. But if anyone wants prayer this morning, please come forward or come up if you're outside, or someone's going to come out. Norris and Janet, I think, going to come out there and just sit and pray or stand with you no matter what you're going through. We love to do that. Take this opportunity. And again, inside here, if you want some prayer or just some space to just thank God and just dwell in His presence, as is such a blessing to do.
No te atua he rama whakakaha pērā ki te rā. Ka tāhai ia I te pō, kore ia ka waiho te ātārangi. Ka taka ngā maunga, ka heki te moana. Ka ho atu te atua te manawa ora, ka tū kaha tātou. Ka whai atu te aroha no te atua, ki te whakaete ki te pō. Ka pūpuhi te manawa ora no te atua, ka tū kaha tātou. Ka tū kaha tātou.